A peaceful morning by the ocean. The waves crashed gently, the sun rose over the horizon, and a father set out for his routine walk. And then, he saw something that would shatter his world. What began as a serene stroll along the coastline quickly spiraled into a nightmare. Hidden in the bushes near the water's edge lay a discovery so horrifying that it would grip the community in terror. A scene that no one could have imagined, a truth buried in secrecy, and a story that would unravel into a shocking tale of crime, deception, and unimaginable horror. As investigators arrived, it became clear that the father's shocking discovery was not just an isolated incident. It was the tip of a horrifying iceberg. Every clue, every footprint, and every piece of evidence would reveal secrets no one was supposed to know, and a nightmare that had been quietly unfolding before anyone could intervene. Stay with us as we follow the terrifying chain of events. A story of mystery, fear, and the dark truths lurking just beyond the shoreline. Part 1: The Discovery. It was a crisp morning, the kind that made the ocean shimmer and the air feel fresh. Fathers, joggers, and morning walkers strolled along the coastline, enjoying the tranquil beauty of the waves. Among them was one father, walking his usual path, unaware that this morning would mark a turning point in his life. As he approached a dense cluster of bushes near the water's edge, something unusual caught his eye. At first, he thought it might be debris, driftwood, perhaps a forgotten bag. But as he moved closer, a sense of unease crept over him. The air seemed heavier, the smell different, and his instincts, honed over years of raising children, told him that something was very wrong. Pushing aside the branches carefully, he stumbled upon a scene so horrifying that his mind struggled to comprehend it. Hidden in the thick foliage was a body, lifeless, partially concealed, and positioned as if the perpetrator had intended it to remain unseen. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to remain calm. His first action was to dial emergency services, his hands shaking, voice trembling as he relayed the location and described the unimaginable scene. Within minutes, police and first responders arrived, their sirens breaking the calm of the morning. The area was cordoned off, and investigators began to meticulously examine the scene. The father, though shaken, stayed nearby, providing initial details about the discovery and the area surrounding the bushes. He described footprints, disturbed foliage, and an eerie silence that contrasted sharply with the ocean's gentle roar. Witnesses in the vicinity later recalled seeing the father walking briskly along the path, his expression tense, pausing only to peer at the bushes. Some thought he had lost something, others sensed immediately that something far worse had occurred. When authorities confirmed the discovery, the beach, usually a place of peace, became a scene of horror and speculation. Investigators began their preliminary work. The body, now identified as belonging to a young adult, displayed signs of trauma, suggesting foul play. The position of the body indicated that the perpetrator had attempted to conceal it, yet the location was perilous, close to the ocean, where tides could eventually expose or destroy evidence. Every detail was carefully noted: footprints, broken branches, and small traces of personal belongings left nearby, all hinting at the presence of someone who had fled in haste, but with calculated intent. Forensic teams collected evidence meticulously. Soil samples, fibers, and footprints were documented, photographs taken from every angle, and the surrounding area searched for any discarded items that might provide clues. Early indications suggested that the crime had not been spontaneous. The body had been deliberately placed, concealed in a manner that suggested premeditation and knowledge of the terrain. The father, despite his shock, became an unexpected witness to the unfolding investigation. His account of discovering the body, the position of the scene, and any suspicious activity he might have noticed earlier became critical to forming the initial narrative. The police emphasized that the discovery by the ocean was not just a crime scene but a complex puzzle, with every small detail potentially unlocking the truth about the events that had led to this nightmare. As the sun climbed higher, the community learned of the shocking discovery. Social media and news outlets quickly reported the incident, drawing attention from locals and authorities alike. The peaceful morning had transformed into a story of fear, horror, and relentless questions. Who was responsible? Why was the body hidden near the ocean? And most chilling of all, what secrets had been left behind in the bushes, waiting to be uncovered? This discovery was only the beginning. Beneath the surface of the sand, the waves, and the foliage lay a story far darker than anyone could have imagined. A story that would unravel gradually, revealing hidden motives, dangerous individuals, and a nightmare that had been quietly unfolding before anyone could intervene. Part 2D, the investigation begins. The moment the father made the chilling discovery, authorities mobilized swiftly. Patrol cars arrived with sirens blaring, officers securing the area while forensics teams prepared to examine the scene. What had been a quiet morning by the ocean was now transformed into a high, alert investigation. The peaceful coastline turned into a grim crime scene. The first task was documenting the scene meticulously. Investigators photographed every detail. The position of the body, nearby footprints, the disturbed foliage, and small items left behind. Each element was potentially a clue, a thread that could unravel the mystery of what had happened. Soil samples, fibers, and even fragments of clothing were collected, all of which would later play a critical role in connecting the suspect to the crime. Witnesses were interviewed immediately. Several joggers and early, morning walkers recalled noticing unusual activity along the bushes. One described seeing a shadowy figure moving hastily through the foliage, just minutes before the father's discovery. Others mentioned hearing muffled noises, perhaps a struggle. Though no one had investigated at the time, thinking it might have been an animal or ordinary beach activity. These small accounts, pieced together, began to form a timeline of the crime, offering crucial insight into the suspect's movements and behavior. The father's testimony was central. He described approaching the bushes and noticing subtle irregularities, broken branches, scuffed sand, and an unnatural arrangement of items. His instincts, honed over years of experience and observation, had immediately signaled danger. When he pushed aside the foliage, the sight of the body triggered shock and fear, but he maintained composure enough to alert authorities, ensuring the crime scene remained intact. His early intervention would prove vital in preserving forensic evidence that might otherwise have been destroyed. As investigators examined the scene, forensic teams made critical observations. The body displayed clear signs of trauma, indicating foul play. The position suggested that the perpetrator had attempted concealment, but had chosen a location that offered a combination of privacy and access. A secluded area near the ocean, yet one that could be reached quickly. Nearby footprints indicated haste in the suspect's departure, while scuff marks suggested a possible struggle during placement. Every detail pointed toward a deliberate, calculated act rather than an accidental death. Digital forensics quickly became part of the investigation. Authorities analyzed cell phone records, social media activity, and location data in the vicinity of the beach. Surveillance cameras from nearby streets and businesses were scoured for any sign of the suspect. Even small details, a vehicle parked in the area at odd hours, repeated visits by certain individuals, were examined for potential connections. Patterns began to emerge, hinting that the crime was not random but targeted. Investigators also explored the victim's background. Family, friends, and acquaintances were interviewed to understand relationships, potential conflicts, and circumstances leading up to the crime. While initial impressions suggested a peaceful life, further questioning revealed tensions, disputes, financial disagreements, and personal conflicts that may have contributed to the fatal outcome. Each revelation provided insight into possible motives, narrowing the scope of the investigation to a circle of individuals with potential connections to the victim. As the day progressed, authorities faced another challenge: managing the psychological impact on the community. News of the discovery spread quickly, drawing locals and media to the scene. The thought that a life could be so violently ended in a place usually associated with peace and beauty unsettled residents. Officers and investigators worked not only to secure evidence, but also to reassure onlookers and witnesses, emphasizing the importance of remaining calm and allowing authorities to gather crucial information. Interviews with witnesses continued into the evening. Small details began to converge, forming a clearer picture of the timeline and possible suspect movements. A jogger recalled seeing a suspicious person carrying a large bag near the bushes earlier that morning. Another mentioned footprints leading from the foliage toward a path behind the dunes. These seemingly minor observations would later prove critical in constructing a reconstruction of the crime, helping investigators understand the sequence of events and narrow down suspects. By the end of the first day, it was evident that this discovery was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a larger, more sinister story. The careful placement of the body, evidence of premeditation, and the emerging motives hinted at a crime that had been planned with precision. The father's shock and quick thinking preserved crucial evidence, allowing investigators to begin piecing together the puzzle. The coastline, once a symbol of serenity, had become a site of horror, and the nightmare was only beginning to unfold. Part 3: Uncovering Motives and Hidden Secrets. As the investigation deepened, the shocking discovery by the father revealed that this was far more than a random act. The authorities soon realized that the crime had been meticulously planned, and understanding the suspect's motive became crucial to solving the case. Behind the serene coastline lay a tangled web of deception, obsession, and dark intentions that had remained hidden. Until now, investigators started by examining the victim's personal life. Friends and family spoke of a life that, on the surface, seemed ordinary, yet subtle tensions were uncovered. Disputes over money, unresolved personal conflicts, and disagreements with close acquaintances began to emerge. While none of these tensions had seemed dangerous before, combined with other factors, they revealed a pattern of escalating conflicts that may have triggered the attack. The victim, seemingly unaware of the growing threat, had continued their routine walks along the coastline, unaware that someone was watching and waiting. Digital forensics played a key role in unraveling the story. Cell phone records, social media activity, and private messages suggested that the suspect had been observing the victim for weeks, possibly even months. Patterns of stalking, obsessive behavior, and a fixation on certain aspects of the victim's life became apparent. Investigators noted that the suspect's actions were not impulsive. Every movement, every plan had been calculated to ensure the confrontation occurred under conditions favorable to the perpetrator. This premeditation reflected not only anger, but also a carefully nurtured sense of control. Profiling experts were brought in to study the suspect's psychological patterns. Based on early findings, the individual displayed traits commonly associated with meticulous planning, obsession, and manipulation. Witnesses described the suspect as outwardly calm, yet the crime scene and behavioral evidence suggested a mind consumed by anger and fixation. The deliberate placement of the body in the bushes near the ocean revealed both a desire to conceal the act and an understanding of how the crime could psychologically impact anyone who discovered it. Witness statements began revealing more subtle clues. A jogger recalled seeing the suspect near the area several mornings prior, seemingly observing the victim and making notes. A local shopkeeper mentioned that the suspect had asked unusual questions about the victim's routines. Even small details, once overlooked, became critical pieces of the puzzle, demonstrating that the suspect had prepared meticulously to execute the crime with maximum control and minimal risk to themselves. Investigators also discovered financial and personal grievances that likely fueled the crime. Debts, arguments over property, and long-standing disputes with acquaintances were documented. While these factors alone might not lead to murder, combined with the suspect's obsessive tendencies and desire for control, they created the perfect storm for a violent act. Each motive was carefully analyzed, helping law enforcement understand the calculated nature of the attack and identify potential leads in the search for the perpetrator. Forensic experts examined the scene with extraordinary care. Footprints, soil samples, and evidence of struggle were analyzed to determine the sequence of events. The suspect had chosen a location that was both secluded and accessible, suggesting familiarity with the area and careful planning. Even small disturbances in the sand and foliage were mapped, reconstructing how the victim had been approached, subdued, and placed. Every detail reinforced the conclusion that this was not an impulsive act, but a deliberate and premeditated murder. As the investigation continued, shocking secrets about both the victim and the suspect began to surface. Friends of the suspect reported unusual behavior, secretive trips, unexplained absences, and obsessive focus on the victim. Conversations once considered innocuous now appeared sinister in hindsight. It became clear that the suspect had not only planned the murder, but had cultivated the environment around it, ensuring that no one would interfere until the act was complete. The father, whose discovery had initiated the investigation, remained a pivotal witness. His description of the scene, the surrounding bushes, and the initial signs of disturbance provided critical insight into the timing and execution of the crime. Without his intervention, crucial evidence might have been lost, and the mystery could have remained unsolved for far longer. By the end of this phase, law enforcement had begun connecting the dots. The suspect's obsessive behavior, the victim's unwitting exposure, and the careful selection of the crime scene painted a disturbing picture of human manipulation, premeditation, and violence. Each revelation brought the investigation closer to its next critical phase, identifying the suspect definitively, tracing movements before and after the crime, and preparing for the eventual confrontation and capture. The quiet coastline, once a place of solace, had now become a symbol of terror and hidden darkness. What started as a father's routine morning walk had unearthed a nightmare meticulously orchestrated, exposing secrets and motives that no one had been meant to discover. And as investigators continued to follow the trail of evidence, the true scope of the crime and the danger posed by the suspect was just beginning to emerge. Great. Abchelai Part 4 liked Hain, 700 words Kasath. Is Part Mean Hum Forensic Breakthroughs, Suspect Key Pursuit. Our investigation Attention Detail Main Explore Karenj Part 4. Forensic Breakthroughs and the Pursuit of the Suspect. The crime scene by the ocean had already painted a chilling picture, but investigators knew that the real breakthrough would come from forensics. Every fragment of evidence, no matter how small, had the potential to link the crime to its perpetrator. This was not a case that could rely on chance. It demanded scientific precision. The forensic laboratory began with the most obvious evidence: the body. The autopsy confirmed what many already suspected. The victim had suffered blunt force trauma, followed by strangulation. The combination of injuries suggested a struggle, and it became clear that the attacker had intended not just to harm, but to ensure silence. Time of death was established, which gave investigators a critical window for narrowing down witness timelines. More chilling was the discovery of defensive wounds on the victim's hands, showing that they had fought desperately in their final moments. Fibers collected from the victim's clothing became the first major clue. Under microscopic analysis, investigators discovered unusual threads that did not match the victim's attire. These fibers hinted at contact with another individual, possibly the suspect, and were sent for detailed chemical comparison. Parallel to this, soil samples taken from the victim's shoes revealed a mix of minerals not typical of the beach, but from a nearby industrial site. This suggested that either the victim or the suspect had been in that area prior to the murder, expanding the scope of investigation. Another critical discovery was made with the footprints around the bushes. The sand preserved partial impressions of a heavy boot with a distinctive tread pattern. Crime scene technicians carefully cast molds, which would later be compared against footwear seized from suspects. While incomplete, the prints indicated hurried movement, one set leading into the bushes, another leading out, strongly implying the sequence of the crime. Meanwhile, digital forensics provided even more damning evidence. The victim's phone data showed several missed calls and messages in the hours leading up to the murder. Investigators traced these communications to a known associate who had a documented history of disputes with the victim. More suspicious was the discovery that this individual's cell phone had pinged towers near the coastline during the estimated time of death. The web of circumstantial evidence was tightening, pointing toward someone who had both motive and opportunity. With these findings, investigators began surveillance on key suspects. One figure quickly rose to the forefront. A man in his late 30s with a history of violent outbursts and financial disagreements with the victim. Neighbors described him as quiet but unpredictable, often vanishing for long stretches of time without explanation. Police monitored his movements discreetly, gathering evidence of his habits, routines, and potential connections to the crime scene. The tension grew as surveillance revealed peculiar behavior. The suspect was seen discarding bags late at night, visiting isolated locations, and even making inquiries about whether the police had discovered anything new by the ocean. His nervous actions suggested knowledge of the crime, and investigators knew they had to move carefully to avoid alerting him prematurely. A single misstep could drive him into hiding or, worse, trigger another act of violence. Forensic breakthroughs added more weight to the suspicion. The fibers discovered on the victim's clothing matched a jacket owned by the suspect. The soil samples, when compared against his workplace environment, showed an identical mineral composition, linking him directly to the unusual soil found on the victim's shoes. And finally, when his boots were seized during a quiet search, the tread matched perfectly with the casts taken from the crime scene footprints. This was the turning point. The evidence was no longer circumstantial, it was conclusive. Investigators prepared to move in, but they understood that the arrest had to be strategic. The suspect was known for volatility and had access to weapons. A sudden confrontation could lead to chaos or even more tragedy. Special units were briefed, and plans for a coordinated capture were drawn meticulously. Meanwhile, the community's anxiety intensified. Rumors spread quickly, with many fearing that a killer was still walking freely among them. Parents hesitated to let their children near the coastline. Joggers abandoned their morning routes, and businesses along the ocean reported a sharp decline in visitors. The once serene setting had become synonymous with fear, its peaceful waves overshadowed by the haunting discovery. As pressure mounted, law enforcement worked tirelessly to finalize their case. Warrants were secured, surveillance was heightened, and the suspect's digital footprint was combed for every detail of his recent activity. Investigators uncovered disturbing internet searches about concealing bodies and forensic detection at beaches, which provided further proof of premeditation. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. The father's discovery had sparked the investigation, but it was the combined weight of forensic science, witness testimony, and relentless police work that brought the suspect into sharp focus. The only step remaining was to confront him, a task that would test the resolve and precision of everyone involved. The stage was set for a dramatic capture, one that would either bring justice to the victim or spiral into a dangerous standoff. The coastline's nightmare had a face now, and the truth was closing in fast. Part 5: The Capture and Shocking Revelations. The weight of evidence against the prime suspect had reached a tipping point. Fibers, soil samples, footprints, and digital records all pointed in one direction. Investigators knew the time had come to move in, but they also understood the risks. The man they were pursuing was volatile, unpredictable, and had shown a willingness to use violence when cornered. One wrong move could result in chaos or more tragedy. A carefully orchestrated operation was launched. Under the cover of night, law enforcement surrounded the suspect's residence. Plainclothes officers monitored the exits, while tactical units positioned themselves to move quickly if necessary. The air was tense. Every officer understood that the suspect might resist capture, and the possibility of a standoff loomed large. At dawn, the order was given. Officers approached the residence, announcing themselves and demanding the suspect step outside. For a moment, silence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Then, movement was detected, the sound of footsteps pacing quickly, followed by the creak of a door. The suspect appeared, his expression oddly calm, as if he had anticipated this moment all along.